Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking what might be the ultimate global trade imbalance and the massive geopolitical crisis it ignited, the First Opium War.
I mean, how exactly did Britain's absolute obsession with tea trigger a devastating war over narcotics? It sounds completely bizarre, right? But it's actually the thread that unravels a highly complex web of economics, addiction, and empire.
Part 1. The Silver and Tea Trap.
So let's set the stage. To really understand this war, you've got to look at a massive macroeconomic crisis brewing at the time. Basically, Britain had this insatiable demand for Chinese goods. Tea, silk, porcelain, you name it. But here's the catch. Chinese demand for British goods? Almost zero. And to make matters worse, under the strict Canton system, the Qing government restricted all foreign trade to just one single port, and they demanded payment exclusively in silver bullion. So Britain is literally bleeding its domestic silver reserves dry, all just to fund its tea habit.
Because of this, the British East India Company was staring down a seriously chronic trade deficit. To stop this massive outflow of silver, they desperately needed a highly profitable product. They needed something, really anything, that Chinese consumers would actually want to buy.
Which brings us to Section 2, the opium smuggling boom. The British East India Company turned to a pretty dark solution. They started manufacturing Indian-grown opium and smuggling it directly into China. Now, this was strictly banned by the Qing dynasty, but despite that, this highly addictive narcotic exploded. It actually became Britain's single most profitable commodity of the entire 19th century. The drug spread like wildfire from Guangzhou right into the interior, creating a devastating social crisis as people across literally all social classes suffered through brutal withdrawals.
And the sheer scale of the smuggling, it was absolutely staggering. To put it in perspective, in the early 1800s, you had about 4,000 chests of opium entering China every year. Fast forward to 1831, that number hits 20,000. By the late 1830s, we're looking at nearly 40,000 chests. That kind of volume completely flipped the global economy on its head. So instead of silver flowing in for tea, Chinese silver was now hemorrhaging out of the country to pay for the drug.
Moving to Section 3, China's righteous crackdown.
So, facing an emptied treasury and millions of addicts, the Daoguang emperor decides enough is enough. He appoints Commissioner Lin Zexu to just completely eradicate the trade. In the spring of 1839, Lin basically forces foreign merchants in Guangzhou to hand over an astounding 1,420 tons of opium. And he doesn't just seize it, he publicly destroys this massive 3 million pound stockpile right on Human Beach. It was this huge, unmistakable display of the government's determination to stop the cartel.
What's really fascinating here is that Lin even appealed directly to Queen Victoria's moral responsibility. He wrote to her, saying, "I now give my assurance that we mean to cut this harmful drug forever." He essentially begged her to stop the poisoning of his people. But tragically, historical records suggest she probably never even received the letter.
Meanwhile, back in Britain, the political reaction was bitterly polarized. You had Foreign Secretary Lord Palmerston aggressively demanding military action. He wanted to protect free trade, defend national honor, and get compensation for all that destroyed private property. But on the other side, future Prime Minister William Gladstone fiercely condemned the whole thing. He called it an unjust, disgraceful war fought over a moral evil. So it was this monumental collision of economics on one side and ethics on the other.
Section 4. Gunboats and Global War.
Despite all that fierce domestic opposition we just talked about, Palmerston's pro-war faction narrowly wins the vote in Parliament. They immediately dispatch a punitive expeditionary force straight to the Chinese coast. And when this clash of empires actually happens, the technological gap is just devastating. Qing forces were relying on traditional wooden junks and matchlock muskets, and they were completely overwhelmed. The British had iron steamships, Congreve rockets, long-range artillery. Ships like the iron steamer Nemesis could easily navigate shallow rivers, literally going against the wind, and they could just destroy stationary Chinese forts from a completely safe distance. It wasn't even close.
Starting with some naval skirmishes in late 1839, the British expedition systematically carved its way up the coast over the next 3 years. They neutralized defenses at Chusan, occupied Guangzhou, and then, the crucial turning point, they captured Zhenjiang in July 1842. This final blow severed the vital Grand Canal. By doing that, they completely crippled China's internal grain distribution and just ground the empire's logistics to a dead halt.
That brings us to Section 5, the unequal treaties.
So, with their financial lifelines severed and the major city of Nanjing threatened by British guns, the Qing dynasty really had no choice.
They were forced to surrender in August 1842. They signed the Treaty of Nanqing, which became the very first of what are known as the unequal treaties. And the terms? They were devastating for China. They had to cede Hong Kong Island, completely dismantle that Canton system we talked about earlier by opening up 5 treaty ports, grant British subjects total immunity from Chinese law, and on top of all that, pay a massive 21 million silver thael indemnity.
But you know what's truly staggering about all this? The treaty never actually addressed the opium problem. Not a single word. It completely failed to restrict the very narcotic that literally sparked the violence in the first place. This allowed the foreign drug trade to just continue completely unchecked, and as a direct result of that, addiction in China doubled in the years immediately following the war.
Section 6. A Century of Humiliation.
The fallout from this single conflict absolutely reshaped global trade, not to mention modern history as a whole. The sheer ease of the British victory totally shattered the Qing dynasty's prestige. This triggered massive domestic unrest, like the devastating Taiping Rebellion. In fact, 20th century nationalists trace this specific period directly back to 1839. They call it the Century of Humiliation. It was a long era of Western intervention and imperialism, and it still profoundly shapes modern Chinese foreign policy and national identity today.
As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a provocative thought from historian John K. Fairbank to just sort of ponder for a bit. Was this destructive clash actually inevitable? Just the result of irresistible Western commercial expansion colliding with a rigid Chinese bureaucracy? Or was it simply the tragic result of a powerful empire acting essentially as a highly profitable drug cartel? It's a hugely complex debate about economics, morality, and imperial power, and it definitely still echoes today. Thanks so much for joining me to unpack the First Opium War. I'll catch you in the next explainer.